Welcome to Compass Stories. I'm your host, Veronica Sterling. And my work is centered on helping people who are in the middle of disruption rediscover meaning, strengthen connection, and move forward with courage. I do this through speaking, sharing experiences, and storytelling. I'm grateful that you've joined me for a conversation today. And if it resonates with you, I hope that you will share it with someone else in your life. Thanks for being here. Listener, if I asked you to come up with some acts of courage, I wonder what are some ways that you would use to define that word? And I'll tell you that courage is something that my guest today knows a lot about. My guest is Chief Tom Synan. He has 31 years of experience on the police force, including that for the past 19, he's been the chief of police for the Newtown Police Department. He's also a retired U.S. Marine. He's a SWAT team leader veteran. He's the co-founder of the Hamilton County Addiction Response Coalition. Chief Synan has testified in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Senate Homeland Security Committee. He has spoken at Johns Hopkins University on a distinguished panel with guests including President Bill Clinton. His career and his work in the opioid epidemic has been recorded and archived in the National Law Enforcement Museum in Washington, D.C. What I really liked about this conversation, though, is that for as much as he knows about courage through a professional lens, in this conversation that I had with Tom today, he talked to me about the courage that it takes to be a human. I really enjoyed this conversation with him. I hope to be able to have another one sometime in the near future. I hope you enjoyed this one too. Let's get into it. Chief Tom Synan, thank you so much for joining me today. I was really looking forward to having a conversation with you because I feel like I'm in this season of my life where I'm like trying to find my purpose. And you strike me as someone who very clearly knows what his purpose is. So I know that there's something you'll be able to teach me today. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
Will you introduce yourself to the listener?
Yeah, I am Chief Tom Synan. I'm with the Newtown Police Department. I'm the police chief there. It's a village about 11 miles east of downtown Cincinnati. And I'm also the co-founder and co-chair of the Hamilton County Addiction Response Coalition, which is a multi-jurisdictional coalition working on addiction, mental health, and a lot of the chronic social issues that we may see in law enforcement and communities in general.
How did you get into this work, becoming a cop and then becoming the chief?
I believe I am very lucky and fortunate to have known my purpose from my first probably conscious thought. I'm sure it was my first breath. I was going to be a cop no matter what. It was what I wanted to do since I was a kid. There was no questioning. It wasn't going to be fireman, lawyer, doctor. I was going to be a police officer. I knew it from day one, and my whole life has been geared towards that. And I really believed that it was going to be as an avenue to change the world. I just didn't know how that would happen. I just thought being a police officer, you could just make such a difference in people's lives and change the world. And that's what I was going to do. And that's how I got into it. I went to Milford High School and then out on the east side in Claremont County, and then went to the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps was, again, just a pathway to get to become a police officer. I thought, if I had Marine on my resume, that would open up a lot of doors, which it did. And then I just went into police, and my dad was a police officer too. He was an auxiliary officer, so we worked together in a small town, Terrace Park, close to Newtown, and we worked together for a while. And then I got hired in Newtown in 1993, March 1st, 1993, and been here since.
Awesome. Did you feel like you were changing the world as a young cop?
No, not necessarily. I think I went the traditional route and did some undercover drug work and was a patrol officer and kind of worked my way up from sergeant to lieutenant and then chief, and I got on SWAT and did that for 10 years. And I learned a lot from the mental aspect of policing and the tactical side, which really helped me a lot, even in the addiction world, how to work through stress and how to problem solve through high stress incidents. It was quite the experience. And I came out of that learning some things and became an instructor on how to make decisions under stress, especially critical incident stress. But I don't know. I mean, you're definitely changing the world because you're making a difference in people's lives. And I went through some political stuff here, and I'll say this, the community came out to support me, and I am very fortunate that I basically got to see my funeral while I was still alive. These people came up and incidents I didn't remember, and they said, 25 years ago, you saved my life. You came on a domestic violence call and you helped me. 25, 30 years ago, I was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and you treated me like a person. And I never forgot that. So, yes, looking back and after hearing that, I made a difference. I don't think I've ever seen anything that you could just necessarily point your finger to until the work with the addiction and the coalition on a larger scale. So I definitely made a difference. I felt like I made a difference in the community. And as much as I helped them, trust me, they helped me too. And that's the cool part about working in a small town. Because when I was going through my divorce or tough times or having money struggles, the community really helped me out. They were my friends. The good and bad with that is I tell people I've been through people's weddings, birthdays, their job promotions, all the good stuff, but I've also been through their deaths and divorces and despair. So I've kind of seen the ups and downs of life in this small town, which has been really cool. So yes, I made a difference here, but I think with the coalition, it has been more of I've made a difference not only across the country but around the world, and that's been really cool.
Yeah, that would be something to it's like you're doing the work and you can't see the forest through the trees sometimes, and then these people start sharing with you, hey, this made a difference, this made a difference. That would be a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, a lot of people don't
Yeah.
get that, and especially as a first responder, you want to know you made a difference. And it was a highly I was there with some other people who were helping me out with some stuff, and everyone was really emotional. It was one person after another, and you think about I didn't even remember the incident, but to them that was something that was so important. And I think as police officers or first responders, we don't always get a chance to see or hear the what you've done, and to have that opportunity, it really validated that the work you did as a police officer made a difference. You as a human being made a difference, and it was really allowed me to be very content in my work, especially now that I'm getting closer to retirement. I will be one who can retire and not have to ask if I made a difference, which is super cool. And I know when we spoke before, I told you I fulfilled my destiny, and that really was as that kid to be able to have that validation and not have to question, did I make a difference? It's super cool to say, you know what, this naivety of I'm going to make a difference in the world and change the world. It was validated, and I can walk away and say, I know I did because people told me, and there's not a question.
That's awesome. Tell me about the coalition. It's a pretty personal story that led you onto that path. I guess I think it's a professional story, but it's also a personal story, I think.
100%, and it was completely unexpected. Being a chief of a small town, again, I get to see the good and the bad with everyone's lives. And we had an entire family here in a small town, a mother and all three of her sons that died from addiction one by one. She died from abusing alcohol and prescription pills, the mother. Her youngest son was shot and killed by crack cocaine. The oldest overdosed on heroin and fentanyl. And then the last of the brothers, his name was Charles, but everybody called him Chucky. He had actually set my personal car on fire when I first started. I used to chase him through the streets. We used to fight. He ended up overdosing a couple weeks before Thanksgiving in 2014. And I got a call from one of my officers. They brought him back with Narcan and said, hey, Chucky's down here. He's crying. He wants to get help. He doesn't want to die. So what do we do to get help? And at the time, we didn't have a group or someone necessarily to call to get him help. So I realized that he was not just the last of a family, but the last of a generation, and said, we got to do whatever we can, take him to the hospital. If we can find a treatment, we'll pay for it. We'll figure out some way to keep him alive. About an hour later, they called back and said, hey, Chief, Chucky's refusing to get help. What should we do? And knowing more about addiction now, It's the familiarity with despair is just as powerful as the fear of hope. And you got to think about here's Chucky, who his whole life has been through the struggle. He's pretty much lost his whole family to addiction. If he goes and gets treatment and fails, then he's looking at it from that perspective of, I failed again. Why should I even try? So that hope is just as terrifying. It's actually more terrifying than the familiarity of despair. I know despair. I live in despair. I know how to cope in it. So why should I go try to do the hopeful thing? Because I know that I'm probably going to fail. And it really taught me a lot about addiction, and that really led me to um, before I go there, what ended up happening was they said, well, we got to keep him alive for at least one more night. Let's take him to jail. Because at the time, as a police officer, my tools are gun, taser, handcuff, and jail. Obviously, the only thing that applied was jail. And I literally said, we got to keep him alive for at least one more night. We took him to jail. We kept him alive for one more night. The next morning, he got out, did what was left of his heroin and fentanyl, and overdosed and died. So I realized in that story of Chucky that all I could really give him was empathy. And I know you and I've talked about empathy. And I'd actually written an op-ed in the Cincinnati Enquirer and talked about how I'd watched him as a kid growing up and the chaos and everything he was going through to now he and his entire family's gone. An entire generation's gone. It hit me really hard personally and professionally. Again, I wanted to change the world. I think I'm Batman. I'm the superhero, and I couldn't even save a family. And I wrote the op-ed, and in that op-ed, not only am I describing the family, what I'd seen, the calls I'd been on, but really I realized the only thing I could ever give Chucky and ever had given him was just empathy. And that was more of just understanding his lot in life and more than judging or criticizing. Because I wrote it in a perspective of how I was hearing people in the community talk about those with addiction. Why should we care about another dead addict? Why should we care about this person? What does it matter? And I was kind of describing it as here's someone who, yes, had all these issues, but was still a human being. And if you would have saw the way he grew up, then maybe you would have a little bit more understanding of how his path ended up that way. So the empathy really was what stuck out in the op-ed, and the op-ed's really what helped get the coalition going. It had gotten a lot of attention. It had garnered a lot of conversations. I literally got hundreds of calls, emails, texts, uh, cards, notes from everyone, doctors, lawyers, judges, nurses, just everyday people saying, let me tell you my story of addiction, or let me tell you my family story of addiction. And at the time, I was the president of the Hamilton County Police Chiefs Association. And I said, look, here's this community speaking out. We need to do something. And we helped form the kind of the basis for the coalition. And I realized that we needed to take it out of law enforcement and make it more of a community. The community involvement really was what I felt was going to make it the biggest difference if we were ever going to mitigate the incidence of addiction and deaths. So I went and talked to Greg Hartman, who was the president of the Hamilton County Commissioners, and talked to him. And he said, well, help me put this group together and we'll form a group. And we started with about a dozen people in the coalition, which was made up of police and fire, treatment, mental health, prevention, and the health department itself. So we started with about a dozen people. We now have close to 1,200 individuals that are attached to it and over 400 organizations. Last year, we posted a 66% reduction in overdose deaths from our peak in 2017. A kind of full circle, Chucky and his family helped start a movement that really changed an entire community. And it's something that's modeled not only across the country, but around the world.
I found the op-ed online.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because in a lot of ways in the story, Chucky's the villain. And I think you even said that. I mean,
He's not a martyr. He caused a lot of pain and grief for people. Yeah.
and yet you really challenged this idea that he at one point was a kid and you remembered knowing him then, and that was who you gave empathy to. And you continued to write, you can't punish addiction out of someone. Are we angry at the right people about heroin? I heard you say once too that you wrote this like not as a cop, like not from a cop's perspective. I'm kind of making up my own words to you here, but it was more that you were writing it from the human side of things. So can you explain that to someone like me? I'm not a first responder. I don't have a first responder family. Um, what is it like coming forward as a human, not as a cop?
It was challenging, especially as a police chief, and it's a very traditional uh, market. It's a traditional group. Law enforcement itself is very traditional standards. You don't often speak out on social issues. You're not necessarily, although sometimes you're getting involved in politics because obviously you're in a political position as chief and you're dealing with political ideologies and groups, but it's not something you normally take a stance on, especially with something you kind of hit it on the head. I was writing it again. It's the first time I'd ever written anything. And it was more of a perspective of how the community viewed Chucky and how I was always seeing him as a kid. Cause I remember that first call going up on the domestic violence and I can say I grew up in chaos, but I had never seen chaos like this. And I remember those kids the first time I went up there sitting on the couch, the three brothers, and they were just in shock and I was in shock. But as you went to call to call to call, all of a sudden I'd go up there and the boys would be sitting on the couch and just playing video games and just completely oblivious to the chaos around them. And I'm talking violence and cussing and things being thrown. And I was really struck by how they were able to kind of block it out, but you could tell it was still impacting them. That was their world they saw the majority of the time. So I think that when I wrote that, I think most of the world would only take Chucky and see them from their own lens. And to your point, say, well, he was a criminal. Look at all the stuff he did. And I don't think you can discount that because he did cause a lot of harm to a lot of people. I was one of them. I became a victim of him. I got my car set on fire. It took me a couple of years I was making little money at the time. They were ordered to pay $25 or they were ordered to pay $5,000 in restitution. I saw 25. So I got to know what it was like to be a victim, but I never forgot that first call with Chucky and the rest of the brothers sitting on that couch in their world. So I think that's what stuck with me. And really the point of the article was written from the perspective of this is what the community tells me. This is what they say I should be. The law enforcement community says as a chief, you shouldn't be talking about these issues and bringing them out. And you definitely, whatever you do, don't be vulnerable and don't show your human side. And I just felt like we were missing a big gap. And I think the best way to answer your question directly, which was not it was kind of my intent, but it was never asked that way or asked myself of that way, was I wanted people who've never experienced this before to be able to walk into Chucky's world, walk into that domestic violence, see that world, but then be able to walk out and see that kid and still see that human person, see that humanity in that kid and that was his lot in life. So I felt like the human side spoke louder than the badge and the uniform. I do think the badge and the uniform gave it some credibility as far as experience. And people said, well, yeah, as a cop, I'm sure you saw this. I don't get to see that. And you're explaining how that world works. But then to touch it with the human side of it, people don't see that from law enforcement either. So it was challenging to step out and do that. And I got to be honest, I was terrified to send that article. And I actually went back and forth on the send button. I had written it about 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a very emotional time. I was completely caught off guard. Why I was so emotional, I think part of it was, again, that dream of saving the world. You feel helpless. So I think that helpless feeling is what I kind of wrestled with and struggled with. So I wrote the article. It's about 3 in the morning. I'm going to hit send. I don't. I sit there for about 20, 25 minutes, try to hit send again, don't. I go back and forth. I get close to hitting send. And this is part of the goofy part of destiny. I hear this voice that says, this is where you'll change the world. So I hit send thinking that maybe this is God or someone talking to me. And I hit send and then I panic and I'm writing back to the Cincinnati Enquirer, please don't post that. Please don't put that in the paper. And by then the editor had gotten hold of it and said, oh, no, we're definitely putting this in there. And they didn't edit it at all other than fix grammar. Again, it was the first time I'd ever written anything. And that really was deep within my heart and my soul, what I experienced, what I saw. And I think it was really the first time I learned that stepping out and being a human, more than the title itself, is really where you connect and make an influence. I think people are really afraid to be vulnerable. They want to be vulnerable. And when you do that and you have this vulnerability, it gives other people permission. And as I said, a bunch of people reached out and said, "Let me tell you my story." And that's when I realized that the one person who steps out and tells a story opens up the door for others, and then we can find connection. And often where we're finding connection is a lot, for me, my personal opinion, is a lot of times in struggle, suffering, grief. That's where we find that real connection with somebody because we all struggle, suffer, and we all are grieving something. And so I think that the story of Chucky, me doing it from a human perspective instead of just a law enforcement perspective, allowed other people to feel that vulnerability and gave them permission to do it, which when that happened, it allowed me to be more vulnerable and be more on the human side. I talk about superheroes and Batman, and it's the whole masks thing. I had this mask and this uniform on, but I'm still a person. And when I lead with that humanity, it's still, I think it makes a bigger impact than necessarily the mask that I'm showing the world.
Did you think it was brave to send the op-ed?
Looking back, I can kind of see that, but no, I don't. At the time, it wasn't necessarily brave. I think I was really terrified. I wasn't sure of the reaction. I knew I would take a hit from it, and I did. Trust me, I paid dearly, professionally, personally, because especially in the beginning, this is back in 2014, 2015. Law enforcement wasn't necessarily out on front like it is now with mental health and our own mental health or our own substance use within the industry, but also from the public side of it. So, I mean, I took a severe hit from it and still pay a price today. So I look back now and maybe in that context, I can say looking back that it was brave to know that when you speak out, you're going to face repercussions. But I wasn't doing it for me. I was telling the story of Chucky and the family. And then what this mission became wasn't about me. I've been able to travel the world, sit with presidents, testify in the Senate, do all kinds of things, but I'm not really just telling my story. I'm telling the story of other people. And that's the way I've always looked at this is I've been able to experience life and other people's lives, connect it with my life, and then share their stories that has helped influence policy, communities, how we view and deal with addiction. I think that's been the powerful part. And it started with Chucky and his family and the loss of that family and being able to be human. Again, at the time, I did not think it was brave. I thought it was I was nervous. I was scared. And then a couple people read it in the Chiefs meeting. And then I kind of saw this split of, yes, I'm getting backlash, but I'm also having people stepping up and saying, hey, we see things differently. We want to go that direction.
I think it was very brave. I think, I mean, being vulnerable is an act of bravery that gets, dismissed all the time, right? Because we're putting ourselves out there in a way that requires that potential for rejection.
Mm,
But I think that, you write about empathy, and empathy is exactly what you're saying. It's being able to see the world through someone else's lens. It's being able to pause long enough to understand what's happening with that lens. And I think it is also the ability to relay and to communicate to the other person that I can see the world through your lens. And I think that all of that takes courage too, because if we're going to look at something and try to see someone else's point of view, see someone else's pain, someone else's shame,
mm,
we have to acknowledge our own lens into that, which means that having empathy for someone, compassion for someone, I think requires us to get comfortable in a space that can stir up our own fear and shame. So I think that sending that was very brave, and you challenge the whole community to have compassion and to be brave, I think. So
yeah,
it's
that's a really good point, and you use the word shame, and that's what you see a lot in addiction, and I think you just nailed it. A lot of people are afraid to be vulnerable because there's this shame that goes along with it, and maybe I did feel some shame at the beginning that I would be viewed as weak, but I looked at empathy, especially from a law enforcement perspective, and I kind of messaged this to everybody because I showed him empathy, because now he's opened my mind and what has occurred to him and other people. I struggle with my own philosophies, my own ideologies. It just opens me up to, like you said, experience another person's life, but it doesn't mean that I accept or condone that life or that behavior. And I think that's where people get confused is if I show someone empathy, they believe then I have to accept their behavior as it is, or I just have to be okay with what they're doing. And I think that was part of the article too, is kind of not necessarily in a conscious way, but more of a deep and intense feeling was, look, I don't condone what he did, and I'm definitely not making him a martyr. He did hurt people. I was one of those people he hurt. But just because of that, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't treat him or see him as a kid or as a human being or anybody else. Doesn't again mean that I have to understand or have to agree with what they did. I'm just trying to understand where they're coming from. And for me, especially someone who helped co-found the coalition and build this community coalition, I learned that in order for that to grow, I had to be able to see, like you just said, see it from someone else's perspective and struggle with it because I really believe that when you can give someone empathy, you can then find understanding. When you can find understanding, then you can find solutions. And really, you just made me think that whole coming full circle of going from 570 overdose deaths down to 194, 66% reduction. It was that empathy with Chucky and his family that really led to helping to form, being one of the members of this group that helped form this collaboration. And we talk a lot about having empathy for people. And again, it's not just empathy for those who struggle with substance use disorder, but those who are impacted by it, the community itself, the families that grieve, that struggle, the financial loss. It is a complex issue. And when you have empathy and can see all those complex layers, then all of a sudden you don't jump to conclusions. What you start looking at, how can I solve this layer? How can I solve the next one? How can I solve the one above that? And then you start finding solutions. And I never really thought about it till you just said it that way in the way you explained it. But I really think the coalition was founded on empathy, and empathy is what really got us to the point of 10 years later to be able to make such a huge difference, and not only here, but across the country and around the world.
Yeah. How do you protect your capacity to keep doing this?
I don't know. That's a really good question, 'cause I was just sitting here thinking, I probably don't and didn't. I think I'm doing better now. I will admit, and I was thinking about this because I got to give a speech in a couple months, and I was thinking about the ending of it. I got to be honest, I'm tired. There's definitely pieces of me that have been lost, or pieces that I've left behind. So I don't know if I necessarily I've done better. In the beginning, it was definitely 24/7. I think everyone that gets into the service industry that helps other people. I know I'm not the only one. First responders are really good at this. We have a group of people with the called a quick response team that go out and help those with substance use disorder and mental health, and they talk about the same thing. They're giving so much of themselves. I do think after a while you learn that you start setting some boundaries. I got to say I struggle with that, and probably not for the reasons why a lot of people think. I really think that my empathy has been my superpower. And I'm afraid that when, even in the struggle of overextending myself or giving too much, that somehow I'll lose that empathy. And I don't want to lose that empathy. But then again, there's stuff that's happened. Like I said, this has not been an easy journey for me either. I've suffered greatly personally and professionally. So there's a part of me too who wants to do that protection and put that wall up. And I have, especially towards the end of my career. It's just a matter of I'm trying to be a little bit more careful of holding on to that empathy that I had as a little kid, that this is still my destiny. I still have a purpose. I'm content in that I fulfilled much of that purpose, but how do I make sure that that purpose continues? How do I make sure that I have that mission while not being so overextended that I'm completely burned out or that I become disgruntled or resentful of the things I've done? I don't think I'm there. I will say I'm tired.
That's fair.
Okay. Tired's okay.
We'll allow that confession. Yes. Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful with burnout because if you're burnout, then you will have compassion fatigue, and that's would just make all of this become more difficult. You can't pour from an empty cup, so to
Yeah,
say. Yeah.
no, and I think I've had a better understanding of empathy too. And I think in the beginning, empathy was I really could feel people's feelings, and you really took those on. And I've written a couple articles about fathers or mothers who have lost a loved one, and they would always give you a date, and that's how they'd start the conversation. So that's how you knew they lost a loved one from addiction, was they would start with their birth date and then the date they died. And I wrote an article where I barely talked to a father because I was so emotional, but I ended up writing this whole article about how he felt, about how I felt, about this whole situation. And I looked back on it years later and I thought, well, how do I know what he necessarily felt? And it was kind of contentious on my part to believe that I could feel his feelings. Maybe I was feeling my own and transferring to him because he never really told me how he felt. So I've really revamped empathy in that it's not necessarily that I'm taking on someone else's feelings. If someone wants to, I encourage them, and if they want to talk to me about them, then I have a better understanding. But I'm not transferring empathy onto them because, like you said, I think if you do that, you get burned out very quickly because you're trying to not only process your feelings, but someone else's, but you don't necessarily know until they told you.
Yeah.
If that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
Yeah, that does make sense to me. And it's like when I talk to people about grief, one of my kind of favorite programs, I guess, that I've shared in the community is helping your friend through grief and other hard things. And I share something similar that you can't have your own stories and your own emotions and like be like a pendulum and put that all on the other person. One,
Mm,
because they're fragile, they're grieving, they can't handle it. But two, then it might be a mismatch. Like your own feelings for the situation might not match up with theirs, and then it might invalidate how they're feeling, and then the connection's broken. So yeah, I think
that's
that
true.
makes sense to me. So you write, obviously you've written articles. Do you just write when you feel spontaneously inspired to do so, or is it a more consistent practice for you?
It's not consistent. I wish it was. I want it to be more consistent. I, I, I think I'm someone who internally has struggled with depression since I was a kid. So I think when I write, it's really from a point of, to be quite vulnerable, it is from a point of depression. There is something that has overwhelmed me, this big question in life that I'm thinking about, something that's impacted someone's life. I'm looking at the situation from a bigger lens. And that's when I really get inspired to write. It's either from that depressive state or it's from a state of anger or anger of people are misunderstanding and judging, especially judgment. So I think it's really from there. And I wish I could be more consistent. And it kind of ties in what you asked before. Now that I put more walls up, I don't feel that as much. Plus, I've worked on myself a ton. So I'm not in those depressive states like I used to be, or incidents don't get me as depressed as they used to. So I don't feel like I have that tendency to write as much. And that's part of what I miss. And I talk about, at least for me, my depression has been both bad and good. It's been bad because I definitely have a tendency to isolate myself. And I know that I'm in that state because I'm isolating myself and it's a protection mode. But then also, it is the time I am actually the most creative and the most in touch and tuned with the world and people. And that's when really I touch my vulnerability is there. And I got to be honest, is when I wrote the op-ed with Chucky, I was in a state of depression. It didn't work out. The family dies. I don't know where my life's going. My mission's messed up. I can't change the world. I can't save the world. So it came from that deep depression. And some of the other articles have been the same way. So it's allowed me that creativity. So it's almost as if I'm trying to sometimes tap into that in order to get that creativity. But you can't necessarily manufacture depression. So it doesn't always work that way. So I'm a little frustrated that I'm not writing as much as I'd like because there's definitely ideas that spin in my head, but the feeling doesn't attach to that idea either. So that's when it becomes a challenge when both the idea, actually, I guess the best way to put it is when that feeling rises so much that it becomes an idea that I cannot get out of my head. that's when it ends up popping into words and I put it on paper.
Got it. I I'd like to think that am a writer and could, have one of
Y-
these daily journaling habits that some people have,
Right.
and I absolutely don't. No. I just run around with it all spinning up in here, and then occasionally it fleshes out into something.
You're 100% right. I used to carry a book with me because I have all these, and I want to write them down, and I never do. But my most organized friends who are already dealing with depression, they're not even dealing with it, and they take all these notes, and I go, "That's what I want to do." I
Yeah.
think I'll do all this stuff, but I don't write it down. No, it's really become in the moments of that where I'm overwhelmed. And again, I'd never written before, and it was interesting because people never didn't believe I'd written that op-ed, and I'd actually had to send them the email. It that was one that really came from a deep, deep place. It was not planned. There was not 100 different drafts. It literally, I sat down and wrote that within about 10 minutes. And the biggest struggle, like I said, was whether I sent it or not, and what were the repercussions of that. Because I think now you talked about vulnerability, is I can't talk about writing that article or how the death of the family impacted me without talking about my own experiences with depression and things that I went through too, which maybe that's part of being able to relate to other people. Is my own experiences allowed me to relate to other people, maybe more from the human side than the law enforcement side. And maybe I got lucky, or maybe I'm unlucky to be able to lead with that humanity instead of the uniform. I think a lot of times first responders rely on the outside, um, because it's a protection. And I remember there was a couple Cincinnati officers when I first started that were shot and killed, Pope and Jeter from Cincinnati Police. And I remember going to their funeral, and I had a friend who was there, and I'm in tears, and I look at them and I go, how do you not be so upset by this? How do you not show tears? And they go, I'm in my Superman outfit right now. So at the time, they could hold it off. They did say later on they couldn't hold it off. So um, I think that's the challenge, is how do you, especially as a first responder, seeing everything that you see and deal with, how do you end up combining both the human side and your uniform, like whether it's Superman, Batman, whoever you think you are, you're going back to that little kid that becomes a superhero, not only to save the world, but as a sense of protection too. That costume, that superhero outfit becomes my ability to do great things. I somehow couldn't do that if I did not have the costume of being Batman or Superman. I think in law enforcement or firefighter, we may do that too. We put the uniform on, and maybe that's what gives us the courage, like you talked about, to be able to go out and confront these issues. And for me, it was really changed, flipping the script and saying, what if I had the courage, like you said, I didn't think about it at the time, but for sake of argument, let's say it was a courageous thing to do. And it was even more courageous because I didn't have my Batman uniform on. It was me, the person, doing it from the heart. It was me from a state of depression doing it. It was me from just feeling and analyzing this big question of, why did this family die? What can I do about it? Why couldn't Batman, Superman, the cop, the firefighter, why couldn't the first responder protect them and save them? So what can I do as a human being to make that difference? And for me, that was the ultimate superhero, because no matter who you are, whether you're Clark Kent or Bruce Wayne, you're still a person. You still got your issues as a human. They're putting on that uniform thinking that makes a difference, but really what it was they chose to put that uniform on in the first place and be a human being and make a difference.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Um, and I wondered if you grieved when Chucky died, and maybe it wasn't so much the loss of him, but this loss of this idea or this expectation that you had just kind of got pulled out from under you, it sounds like.
100%. Yeah, I think part of it was that empathy stuck with me, and I really did see him as a kid. So it was quite the shock that the entire family died, and of all people, Chucky. I mean, I'd been through so much with him, not on purpose. Our lives seemed to join together all the time. I'll tell you a really quick story. This is how Chucky was. Chucky would walk down the street smoking a joint and drinking a beer, and I'd literally just be on patrol, and he'd be walking down the sidewalk with a beer and a joint, and I'd stop. I go, Chucky, what are you doing? And he goes, Tom, man, you're always harassing me. Why you always harass me? And I go, Chucky, you're literally walking down the street drinking a beer and smoking a joint. He goes, oh yeah, okay, you got me.
You
But that's
got me.
yeah. So that was that. That's what you expected from Chucky was he was going to do these things. It was just part of his life. It's what he grew up with. And when it was gone, it was kind of to your point, it was kind of a shock that he was gone, that the whole family was gone. And then I think, like you said, what hit me was this this image of I literally was going to save the world, and here's an entire family that and my entire department, I wasn't the only one that dealt with them. Many of my officers dealt with them too, and yet we couldn't protect this family. We couldn't save them, and it really made me question this profession and this job, not as far as in leaving it, but we are expected and take on this burden of dealing with these chronic social, mental, medical health conditions, homelessness, poverty, race, domestic violence, addiction, mental health, these things that we only have tools to deal with these critical incidents, guns, taser, handcuffs, were there for crisis really. And that's where the SWAT stuff really made a lot of sense to me being a SWAT officer because I'm dealing with emergencies, the team's dealing with emergencies. We have the tools to do that. You start talking about dealing with addiction and mental health and poverty, race, all these complex social issues. None of these tools work. So then if I can't do it with my tools and I can't do it as a human being, and then you lose again an entire family, to your point, I felt very helpless and I felt like there was probably some anger too. Why am I, as a first responder, being told to deal with these issues when I don't have the tools, knowledge, or resources to be able to do it? And that's really the coalition was that. And it was to be able to sit across from a table from a mental health expert, a substance use disorder expert, an elected official who could open up doors, a health commissioner who could get hospitals involved. And I remember going in my first meeting and I was so upset because I don't often tell the story. So Chucky died, and a few months later, his girlfriend died of an overdose. And I was so upset. And on one of my first coalition meetings, I'm pounding the table, cussing. Why are you always effing letting these people die? Why aren't we doing more? On and on. And then I get to sit across from these people who've been doing this for 30, 40 years, heads of major mental health and addiction services and local leaders, and they go, well, this is the hurdle I face. And then this person would say, this is the hurdle I face. And I got a 2 hour quick lesson in the complexity of not only substance use disorder, but grants, funding, community stigma. All those things really hit me hard. And I thought, okay, well, this is not as easy as I thought it was. I wanted to just save lives, which they do too, but there's so many hurdles that go along with it. And I was just talking to somebody yesterday about this, and I know when we're building community coalitions, people always say we have to tear silos down. I learned in that first meeting not to tear a silo down because one, they were the expert. Why would I tear their silo down? I need them. I need their silo. What I wanted was a key to the front and back door of their silo. I wanted them to let me in, tell me what your hurdles are. I'll tell you what my hurdles are. And when I walk out the back door, I'll go to the next silo, open up that door. And then all of a sudden we share our hurdles. We share our strengths and our weaknesses. And then all of a sudden the silos, these experts can come in and work together and solve this issue. And I think that's what we did with the coalition. We never once wanted to tear down a silo. We did give each other keys to the front and back doors. The other thing, too, is when you tear down silos, people become extremely defensive. That would be like me telling you, I'm going to come in and do everything that you're doing, even though I have no training, knowledge, experience, no tools, no resources. Why would I do that? I want to
Yeah.
come in and go, Veronica, I have a key to your front and back door of your silo? I want to tap into your expertise. I don't want to put you out there and tear your silo down so that you feel like you have to defend you, your project, your mission, because I'm sure you're doing it for the same reasons I am too. We all wanted to get to the same place. But what I really need your expertise in that silo because I don't know what it is. And when we did that, it really took off. And I think that's why we've been able to stay together for 10 years. Most community groups and coalitions don't last long. And we've been able to last long because I think, in a sense, people don't feel like you're trying to take something from them. And I think also in a sense they know that you're there because you really need them and you want them to help you and use their expertise.
Yeah, it's like your empathy superpower was like a transferable skill to collaboration. Because you also had to see from their point of view too. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
pretty
and
cool.
they really struggled. I really honestly believe these were the experts in the room that, and I was naive. And I really believe that when I go in there and I tell them as a cop, I just saw an entire family die. This person who had such an impact on me that I ended up being so vulnerable wrote this article, part of the reason why we're all sitting here, and you can't help save them. And then hearing all the hurdles and struggles they faced, which I faced too, it ended up having, to your point, it was, I can now understand their lot. And it made me struggle with concepts and ideas, and we became so collaborative that it was often here I am as a law enforcement officer signing grants for mental health and addiction services because they could show that cross collaboration. And it really helped uh, to get treatment on the streets and get funding for the treatment. And they helped me too because excuse me, the more funding they could get, the more that we could help people and connect them into treatment and services. So it ended up helping the entire group. But yeah, I'm not a fan of tearing down silos.
When you look back, I guess maybe over your whole career, from becoming a cop all the way to today, what do you think surprises you the most about the journey, your stamina, the result of the work, any of it?
I think what surprises me the most is we have so much more in common than what we think. We're not that much different. And Newtown's kind of a cool place because we have such a wide variety of demographics. Uh, you really can be in one part where you're talking to people with hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you can be part with another person's on a fixed income, and everyone has the same issues. We're all human beings. There's still that suffering. There's still that grief. There's still that hardship. It doesn't matter how good you think you have it or how bad you have it. We all go through those parts in life. So I think that's been surprising. I think one of the things that I love about this job the most and what I'm going to walk away with is I truly got to experience every aspect of life and not necessarily just my life. I got to experience through other people. I've been through the highest highs and the lowest lows. And I think a lot of times, and this is probably why I'm not completely burned out, is because I am grateful for the suffering and the struggle. I'm grateful that I had to struggle through some of this, and I'm grateful that I struggle with my own ideas and concepts. I don't know necessarily my own identity because I struggle and I can see things in this gray area. But I think that's actually a good thing too, because I don't walk away coming in so defined, and I'll walk out of this not so defined. And I'll be able to walk away and say, man, I've experienced everything: the deaths, the despair, the joy, the births, the graduations, all of these things that I don't think a lot of people necessarily. I think when you're talking about purpose, a lot of times we're thinking about, we just want, what's my purpose and my destiny so I can make a difference. And really what you want in purpose and destiny is, what is that journey? And how does that journey, where does that journey take me? And what experiences do I have during that journey? And if I can struggle through that journey, and if I can have hardships and I can build that resilience, if I can build empathy, I walk out not necessarily having more answers than what I had from beforehand. I have a little bit more understanding than what I did when I walked in. And I think that's the greatest thing I've gotten out of this job, is to be able to have this journey, experience the fullness of life. And I think that's where I'm so content, is there's nothing else really for me to ask for. And it's not even accomplishments. It's not that I look back and you can say that this is the legacy or you made a difference. It is, I got to walk this journey of life and experience life to its fullest. And I don't know if a lot of people get to say that. And I'm lucky that I've got to do it.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
What haven't I asked you? What have we left on the table that you think we still need to, you'd like to share today?
Well, I think one of the things when we talked the first time that is so fascinating with you is the grief aspect of it. And we don't really talk about grief. And I think that's part of the challenge with this, not just in law enforcement, but just being a human being in that vulnerability is grief. And I wish it was something that we taught each other. I wish it was something that was taught in school. I wish, because I that's the other thing is when I think about commonality, I think each of us at some point in life get kicked in the gut and get the wind knocked out of us. And I don't think a lot of people, unless you have parents or someone in the family who teaches you about how to get back up and that this is going to happen. I think a lot of times we go through life and we want certain things to happen. We want to get married, have kids, have a successful job. We want to be able to look back and say that our life had meaning and purpose and it meant something to the world and people around us. But there's somewhere along the line of life that you're gonna get the wind knocked out of you. There's no doubt about it. But I don't think people necessarily teach us that that's gonna happen. And when it happens, you're a victim of life, and I think you have to accept that you're a victim at that moment, not saying that you stay a victim, but go, "Oh, man, life knocked the wind out of me. I'm a victim right now. How can I overcome this, and what lessons can I learn from this?" And resiliency for me is not just getting back up, it is what lessons have I learned. I don't think that we've taught our kids or just the community in general how to grieve, and I think that's probably where a lot of struggle comes from. And to your make you just made me think. Probably as a kid and dealing with depression, it was more of that. I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't learn how to grieve. And for me, maybe grieving, I thought it was depression, but it wasn't. So now I've learned how to grieve and actually take the time. Yes, I did grieve for Chucky. I've grieved. I do take time to grieve for things, and it is purposeful and it's intentional. I've had some major incidents happen as a police officer, and I tell my friends, "Give me 3 days, I'll be fine, but I just need this time away." And this is what I'm going to do. And I walk through that process and I grieve. And actually, it made me think that's probably why I've not gotten completely burned out, is because I've allowed myself to process those feelings. I had an old sergeant who told me never personally get involved. And I know why he said it as protection, but I think again, wearing that uniform as like a shield is not protection. What's protection is going through life, getting kicked in the wind knocked out of you, feeling grief and processing grief is what really protects you in the long run.
Yeah. Wow, that's very well said. We should record this so we can remember what you said here.
Yes, because it just kind of
Yeah,
popped up.
that was really
You
good.
you make me think. No, you're making me think with the questions, and we talked about this before. I don't think we don't talk about grief and we don't teach grief. And
No. Yeah, I think grief gets like really oversimplified. There's all these platitudes, oh, grief is just love with no place to go, and those types of things. And and I don't want to take away from people who find meaning and connection in those kinds of platitudes, but when I talk to people about grief that they're experiencing, they aren't just saying, "I'm sad because I loved someone." They're saying, "I am angry that they died. I am confused. I feel guilty because of X, Y, and Z." There's you know, this whole like flood of emotions that comes out. And so I think that we should acknowledge that grief isn't just one type of just love or just sadness, kind of morphed into something else. It's its own big beast that we have to, you know, reckon with sometimes. And I think there's a lot of shame that can come with grief. And that's why we don't talk about it. I do think that stigma gets a lot smaller when we start talking about the thing. And I think if we're all going to show up and talk about the thing without just passing judgment and dumping more shame onto it, that we have to do it from a lens of empathy. Yeah. So maybe we should all, if your superhero cape is an empathy cape, I mean, maybe we should all learn how to weave one for ourselves too. Yeah.
yeah, you made me think that Chucky and his family never got the opportunity to grieve. And I'm not going to say that everyone with substance use disorder or mental health is, there's obviously pain underneath. And I think some people do use to kind of numb that pain. And it's definitely hard for anyone that struggled with mental health or been diagnosed with depression or anxiety or anything along those lines. It's definitely challenging. And again, I had to reframe my own depression in that it was also a gift and that allowed me to see the world from a different lens. And if I could tap into that lens. Now, I will fully admit I suck at other people's grief. I am very much I will cry more than anybody else, so people are probably looking like, "Wait a minute, I'm the one that's sad. Why are you crying? You cry more than I do." So I'm not necessarily good at it, but I gotta tell you that the most grateful I've ever been and the most honored I've ever been is to be allowed into other people's grief, because that is such a gift that someone would trust you enough to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm gonna share my story." And really, I think that, like you said it before, and you said it so well, is that empathy is that sharing that story and to be able to sit in someone else's story, hear it, feel it, understand it from their perspective. Again, I don't have to accept it or condone it or say this is going to change how I'm going to do things or my principles or values, but just to be able to sit in someone else's perspective, man, you get such a different and unique sense of the world. And it's so cool to see the world from someone else's perspective. And I cannot think of anything more honorable than someone saying, here's my pain. Let me share my pain with you. And again, I've had a platform to where I get to talk to elected officials on high levels or to influence policy. And often it's not from my perspective, it's what from someone told me. And they'll say, I'm not strong enough to do this. Will you go say this for me? Will you tell my story? And that's such a gift for someone to be that open and vulnerable and to allow you into their grief. And it changes you when you're able to sit in that grief. Again, I'm a baller. I will cry like crazy, but I'm definitely listening to what they're saying, and it's having an impact. And I think that when you're in somebody else's grief, you're really reinforcing is empathy. It teaches you empathy, it reinforces empathy, and then you can walk out with, again, I think a lot of people think I'm on one political spectrum or not. I'm really in the middle. And for me, I struggle with a lot of this. I struggle with a lot of the harm reduction. I struggle with a lot of the policies. I struggle with a lot of things that I stand up and support. But I also believe it saves people's lives. And for me, that's the ultimate thing. And I love the fact that I struggle with my own ideologies and concepts because it makes me go back. It is hard and it's confusing. You do lose some identity, and you also do lose some of, I'm so concrete in this and so concrete in that. But I also think it allows you to walk through the world and see the layers. And when you can see the layers and connect the dots within the layers, I'm telling you, again, you don't walk out with answers. You walk out with more understanding.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your empathy. Thank you for your service, your leadership. Thank you for challenging the rest of us to have more compassion for others. Thank you for this conversation today. I really enjoyed it.
I really appreciate the fact that you challenged me and challenged my thoughts, and it's really cool to dig deep into it. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I look forward to another conversation.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for listening to this episode of Compass Stories. I'm your host, Veronica Sterling. And if you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to hear more and share it with others. Thank you for doing so. That's really helpful for me. To learn more about my message and connect, you can find me at www.veronicasterling.com.